Yeah, those sheets. Okay. Well, greetings, everybody, and a continued Shabbat Shalom. One of the nice things about Havdalah is, while you can't light the candle to close out Shabbat before you get a couple stars in the sky, you can actually extend Shabbat until around midnight and light the Havdalah candle at that point. So we're still in Shabbat Shalom mode until we light the candle, and then we'll move into Shavuot Tov mode.
Good evening. So please, I hope it doesn't bother anybody that I'm just going to eat something here. You can pretend we're at Starbucks. And
there we go.
I don't know, I'm having whatever you eat at Starbucks. I have no idea what you eat at Starbucks, but like a muffin. And we're just chatting, if that will help you. I'll wave it around for a minute. Good evening. We do have a few questions that we can be answering that people have sent in. And I'm saying few. We have a big choice today, but we were just talking upstairs and we thought maybe if we can't think of something else usually does occur to us. Sometimes it involves our pet peeves, which we never know what they are from week to week either. So anyway, good evening. Shabbat Shalom. It's nice to have you. How are you doing?
I can tell I'm going to have a little continual problem with my having to clear my throat, so I'm sorry for that.
Tea? It's too hot for you right now.
Maybe that'll help later on.
Maybe about 15 minutes will be cool enough for him to drink. It feels very abrupt to just go into a question. So
yes, it does.
You have to make clever banter with me for a few minutes.
All right, banter.
No,
not
but
so clever.
we will be cutting his hair.
This fine set of locks.
So please, the next time you see him, I know it'll be on the screen, but just tell him how much better his hair looks after I cut it. So, we have always had the arrangement where I cut his hair. So if you have any complaints about his hairdos, if it's cutting, you'll have to talk to me about that. But he looks about 20 years younger when he gets his hair cut. So.
Yeah, and I'm going to have to shed some of this Santa Claus look since we're rapidly moving out of January. It may be time for that.
And these people might not know, but I have never seen him without his beard. Ever. I've seen pictures. That's been totally enough of that, seeing him without his beard, because it was not a good look for him without a beard. So.
And in fact, our lovely daughter Eve has a copy of my high school yearbook picture posted on her refrigerator, so she can laugh at it every time she walks past.
So charming. Then you have the picture of you and Pop and your brother Bobby, who all stood side by side, but almost like a singing group or barbershop quartet group, where you all went to the side and looked over your shoulder, and from the 60s, and it was laughable. It was very fun. It's a very fun picture of you guys. You could tell you're all related and all without beards. Yes?
And I was going to add to that just one other slight anecdote, and that is that I have not seen a barber in probably 70 years.
That was 70. Yes.
Not 17, but 70. So
yeah.
First mom cut the hair, then as part of Patrice's initiation into the family, into the tribe, she was taught how to cut my hair.
Your mother didn't teach me a thing.
All right.
All right. Are we done with cutting your hair?
Yes, we're done, and Virginia's been able to join us, so
we're happy.
Yeah.
We have to recruit more men.
Yeah.
Is it because we talk about your haircuts that men don't show up?
I don't know.
Okay. Let's do the slightly easier questions first, and then we'll get to the slightly harder question first. Okay. Some of you, what I finally got around to doing this week, it's not that I've been so terribly busy. The problem has been I postpone doing things, and then it's not a good time, or I think of it at midnight when, trying to do other things. And so this week, John and I have had a ministry, it seems like, for 70 years, but we haven't had the ministry for 70 years. I'm not that old yet. We have a ministry called Menorah Ministries, and we have a Facebook page, as you do nowadays. And I wanted to put up our last, or at least part of our last session onto our Menorah Ministries page, which I finally was able to do this week. And in that, if you want to recap of where we were at last time we met, it was with the discussion about, first of all, about the Magi, the wise guys, as we like to call them at our house. We do really call them the wise guys at our house. And the shepherds in the fields.
Right.
Because when you listen to your average Christmas sermon, or you buy Christmas cards, or however you encounter in public life the story of the birth of the Messiah, there's many common misunderstandings whenever the scene is pictured, and if you happen to know people or have little tiny critters that you could put into a scene with the baby Yeshua in it. A lot of people like that, it turns out. A lot of people collect those. You'll see, just historically speaking, horrific ideas about, and I don't mean because they have little tiny bears or they have little tiny animals being the people. I don't mean that. I mean, seriously, they don't understand halfway the way it looked, or who was there and why they were there. That was in that particular session, and drawing out of that particular session, which was shepherds. So you mainly did the Magi. Looking back on it now, or since we're somewhat out of the season now, what would you say is the biggest misconception about the Magi?
Gosh, the biggest one. To my mind, the biggest one is not so much about the Magi, because you could enter into some sort of discussion as to whether they were non-Jewish or Jewish. And as I mentioned the last time, I think there's more than adequate evidence that they were Jewish. I think the biggest misconception is that they arrived when the child Yeshua was about 2 years old, that it took them 2 years to make that journey, which was a very important journey for them to make. For them to have taken 2 years to get there, they would have had to stop at every rest stop and oasis on the way and spend an overnight, if not more, in order for them to have taken that long. So I would say that's probably the biggest misconception. It didn't take them 2 years. It probably took them more like 2 weeks.
And there's no indication that there were just 3.
No, that's correct.
Where
did the 3 come from?
Where did the idea of the 3 come from?
Yes.
I have an idea. Do you know?
I have evidence that it was 3.
You do?
Are you ready for the evidence? We 3 kings of Orient are. Is that
nice?
Enough?
Good singing too. No, as a matter of fact, and the idea that you see depicted in many scenes, they're usually called a creche after I think it's the French slash Italian word for cradle is that one of them is an African. And I believe that all comes from, and this is not to denigrate it at all, it's just where it comes from, the Roman Catholic Church. I believe that was some of that kind of teaching that went around for hundreds of years, where they got theirs. You know, I find it ironic that many Christians think that when Jewish people talk about the Talmud or the Midrash or some other Jewish writings, that those are very strange and mystical things that we don't need to pay attention to because who knows about them. But when the same kind of stuff, in other words, things that have accrued down through the ages as names or explanations or something, when it's done by Christian churches, that those are fine. Those are true and those are real. But somehow the Jewish type of thing, the same type of thing, which doesn't harm anybody, it's fine. If you believe that there's an African guy with a major, go right ahead. But I just think it's a little weird that there's a different sort of a standard oftentimes for like, oh, we're not listening to Talmud. Oh, no. But, you know, yeah, the names of the wise men. Yeah, there's no indication of what the names of the wise men are. So, as for Melchior, and I can't remember.
It was Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego.
No.
Long story.
Balthazar. See, he even knows, and he's not Catholic. So, yeah, I don't know where those names come from. There's no, what we have in the historical record is in the scriptures. If it's not in the scriptures, somebody got it from somewhere, and I don't know about whether it's even worth your time to look into what their names were. I don't think you could find it.
In other words, don't Google it now.
Don't Google it now.
Pay attention now, Google later.
Yes. Plus, it's not worth your time Googling. Do you really care what their names are? In it, really? But they're very fine people.
Shem, Ham, and Japheth.
Ham, Shem, and Japheth? Yeah, Japheth is our nephew, so he'd be a little old by now. Anyway, welcome to our...
Peter, James, and John.
Peter, James, and John. Okay, I have hot tea and I know what to do with it. Thank you for laughing. I would never abuse my husband. Yet. All right, so on so am I... That was the Magi. The Magi, just to review where we've been last time.
And
I talked about the shepherds and why when you have people don't like it by people. There's a group of Christians now and they are teaching that and some Messianic Jews, and they are teaching that of course the birth came in the fall, and they're very adamant about it, and I understand. People don't like the commercialism of Christmas the way it is in our culture, although I think it's not as bad as it used to be. Right. And I think COVID really shut a lot of the commercialism down. That they don't like the commercialism, they don't like the emphasis on Santa, even though Santa himself is a lovely person. It's what has been made out of it and how it overshadows the whole entire story. I get that, being unhappy with our culture and the way it presents what should be more of a, for lack of a better word, holy idea, sacred idea. And it's all about the stuff and the toys and but that doesn't mean that. I know there's an urge to say, well, we don't believe in any of that because he was born in the fall, so thank you so much. That eliminates all that Santa stuff. However, when you look at the story, the way it's presented in the Gospels, the only time of the year, agriculturally speaking, that those shepherds would have been in the fields minding flocks of sheep would be, well, there could be some in the summer, but in the winter would be not the fall. It has to be at that certain time. And I went into that for a long time.
Appropriately so.
Because people today, and this is not a complaint, it's an observation, they're very out of touch with ideas of crops and farming and anything having to do with agriculture on the ground. Plus, especially now, when, at least in Florida, I can't speak for other areas of the country, but in Florida, we get a lot of our produce from Mexico. And Mexico has a different growing season, especially than if you lived in Montana. You have the one growing season there's no growing season from Thanksgiving until they plant winter wheat at the end of January. But we have at least 2 growing seasons here in Florida, and in Mexico, I think they have as many as they want. Okay, back to shepherds. So the question was about, so the shepherds in the field. Another point that I made was, according to Talmudic materials, Talmudic materials could be helpful and historic. Yes, they can, especially during the Second Temple. Now, what I was describing when I talked about the shepherds in the field, and everyone remembers that the shepherds were in the field at night around Bethlehem. They were in the hills of Bethlehem. And Bethlehem, we all remember, not only was it Yeshua's birthplace, but really in a certain, not a tangential way, that Bethlehem is the city of David. It's called the city of David. Why is it called the city of David? Because he was born there and he's from there. So it's called the city of David. I know that's sometimes confusing because they also call Jerusalem the city of David, but they call Jerusalem the city of David for a different reason than they call Bethlehem or Beit Lechem. Beit Lechem means house of bread. So that's how much growing is and fields of grain are associated with Beit Lechem. So house of bread. But that's where David's family is from. And so remember, the idea was that Miriam and Yosef were coming from Nazareth, where they actually lived, down to Bethlehem because there was some kind of census. Is there any historical proof for that census that they were supposedly coming down to be numbered in, remember?
Yeah, there are historical records that reference the census, and there's also a lot of scholarly argument as to, because of what is specifically referenced, how the story could not have been historically accurate, but there's been more than adequate response to that particular line of argument. And I'm going to guess that someone who Patrice mentioned in her Tuesday night class, Lisa Archer, a late friend of ours, in his book, what's the title? I think it may simply be called Biblical Discrepancies or something pretty close to that. He in all likelihood would have dealt with that. There have been more recent articles as well dealing with it to show that, yes, the record in the Gospels can and does fit into the historical chronology of that time period.
Good. No, that's good. Anyway, it just happened to occur to me. I haven't heard about that in a while.
Yeah, it has to do with when Quirinius was governor of Judea. And the question is, so when was he governor of Judea?
And did he ever have a census?
And the fact is that there was a regular or rolling census that took place in the Roman Empire at that time period. So,
and you know what just occurred to me, because we never talk about that census. But you know what does talk a lot about census?
What?
Well, you have famous, what's the plural of census? Censi? I don't know. Let's just call it census.
No, those are the guys with swords and...
Sensei?
Yeah, the sensei.
Sensei. Okay. Let's move away. What was I saying? I'm so confused now with
census.
Swordsman from Japan. I'm very...
Census.
A census. Well, in Numbers, why is the book of Numbers called Numbers? Because census. And what is something very famous about David David took a census, and it was not a good idea because one of the main reasons you take a census in that time, not our time, but in that time, that was a clear marker that the king was going to go to war, that the leader was going to go to war. So they would need to know how many fighting men that they could depend on. So I don't think it's just, oh, by the way, this lovely couple is coming to Bethlehem because there's a census. No, the word census is a trigger word. It should remind the people, yeah, the census in Numbers, and then what happened there, but also and mainly maybe the census in David that got him in trouble. It got him in trouble, and problems accrued to the people because of David's. I don't know exactly what he did that was wrong about taking a census at that point. God didn't want him to, and he did it anyway, or?
If I remember the response coming from, I'm going to guess it was the prophet Nathan, because that's the one who he often interacted with. It had to do with the fact that for some reason, the way in which this was conducted, or the time and way in which it was conducted, it may have, in the context, it appears that for David that had to do with reveling in his power, his might.
Oh, I see.
The strength of his kingdom, whereas instead of how should I put it, demonstrating how much he was dependent on God for that strength, because and that the military strength, because God's the one who given it to him.
So looking at his human strength rather than depending on God.
And it appears to have been done in a boastful fashion.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yes. And boastful fashion, and that's what also got Moses in trouble. Mm-hmm. Right? The boasting thing. Right?
Do you want to get a sidetrack?
No, I'm just going to make a statement.
Oh, okay. Sure.
I'm not going to get off on Moses.
Because that was last semester.
Thank you, dear. Where he says, must we bring water out of the rock?
Yeah.
And that was a step too far.
And you're right, that this seems to be of the same ilk.
Yeah.
But because what you mentioned a minute ago is so very important. The term census was a word that triggered that connection and echo, and it was intended to do that. That I'm thinking that's at least one of the reasons. You know, Luke makes a lot of historical reflections, and he's an amazingly accurate historian. But since part of what he's doing in the Gospels to present Yeshua as the David or the son of David, that connection at the outset would have triggered the thoughts right away for that Davidic connection.
Anyway, now back to the actual question. So the question,
which has to do with David,
and shepherds. All right. Would David have been one of the types of shepherds raising sheep for Pesach? So Passover. Well, when we encounter David,
you hold that for a second. Let me quickly fill in a bit of background. Part of what we talked about 2 weeks ago, please remember, is that the shepherds in Bethlehem at that time were likely, in all likelihood, the sheep that they were tending to were the ones that were going to be the candidates for the Passover sacrifice. Yeah.
Don't have something about.
I didn't give you enough time to chew it.
Okay. Where was I? It was very important. Oh, when we first encountered David, you'll remember, because a lot of people know this, he's the youngest of a big, huge family. And his brothers go off to fight a very oppressive giant guy who's down in the valley just over the hill from their home. If you literally walked, you live in Bethlehem, and it would have to be on the outskirts of Bethlehem because they owned land that had to be farmed. So you're not living downtown Bethlehem, although we're not talking about a huge city. But it was possible to walk from the length the town of Bethlehem. Town would be a really good word for this. Walk over the hill into the valley, down where the Philistines lived, because the Philistines lived on the seacoast, on the flatlands mainly, because they had technology for iron plows. So the Philistines could make iron plows that were strong enough to be used in farmland. And the Israelis didn't have that technology yet. It was a secret down under the Philistines. So he walked over. I think this is really in the text. He took the lunch for his brothers who were off to fight Goliath. We've all heard of Goliath. So he went down over the hill carrying his brother's lunch because he's the youngest. And when he shows up, things start to get very, very exciting because the king notices him and he starts talking. So he had a good self-concept right then, even though he was the youngest of 12. And so the family, obviously, because one of his jobs was being a kid, I can't talk right now. Let me have some more tea. One of the statements that is made in this whole scenario where he takes the lunch to his big brothers, and but Goliath is there, and King Saul is really afraid of Goliath. King Saul is not a hugely brave person at all. We know that from the first time we see him, where he's literally hiding in the luggage. Or he's in the luggage. He's wandering around the luggage that was there in the vicinity when I think Samuel is calling for him to come and be anointed as king. So I think it's amazing how the biblical text sometimes, if it was a different situation, you'd laugh out loud. If they wrote this scenario about King Saul, it's time to be anointed king. Where is he? Somebody finds Saul, and he's somehow out with the luggage, out on the edge of the crowd. When I always joke and say, when we get to heaven, one of the things we'll do with all that time is we'll have, I used to say lectures, but I think we're going to have videotapes.
Webinars.
We'll have no, we'll be right there. We won't need a webinar, but they'll roll the videotape of what actually happened. So when they roll the videotape of where is Saul when he's going to be anointed as king, yeah, he's not there. So how did I get on to Saul?
Because you went from Shepherd David coming to feed them all Goliath, and the fact that Saul was there.
Saul was there and afraid to fight Goliath. It's pretty clear if it doesn't even say those words. And so you have this kid coming up. He was a young teenager then. Was not an old person like his brothers who were fighting guys. So they owned flocks, and one of the jobs he had was being a shepherd. And as many, many people realize, not from the cartoons where you have the sheepdog greeting the coyote as they come in to do their job. Have you seen those? Some of my favorite cartoons are the sheepdog is clocking out and the coyote clocks in to take care of the fluffy little sheep. It's a very cute series of cartoons. It's not a job for wimps. It is a job for younger children and today, and I'm assuming back into history, also girls could do that job too. It wasn't just for guys. And it would depend on how old and how capable you were of whether you were able to watch the sheep. When there are natural predators, it's very important to be able to fight the natural predators because sheep they're valuable. Sheep are valuable. If you have thousands of them, an individual one is not as valuable. But the ones in the fields in Bethlehem were valuable during the Second Temple period. We do not know what the systems were like as far as the sacrifice system that was in place for the first temple. That would have been Solomon's temple. So when we were talking about David, he was a shepherd. We don't know what the sheep from the family were used for, and because we don't know exactly how the first temple worked. And when we talk about the story of Yeshua's birth, that's the second temple. If you have as a nice round number, David. David is easy to remember when he was. So if your mind is a mush of you're not good with numbers or algebra or math, and you can't place the time period that different people are in the Bible, David is easy to remember. David, you can date about 1000 BCE. So 1000 BCE is about the time period when David lived. That's not even, we didn't even get to the first temple then. Remember, David's son Solomon was in charge of building the first temple. So that was in the 900s. So when we talk about David, no, he was keeping his family's flocks. But that metaphor, the idea of sheeps and shepherds, sorry. The idea of sheep and shepherds just infused throughout the scripture, both older and newer covenants. And you might do well to buy a book on sheep and shepherd if you're interested in it. The Middle Eastern sheep are a different breed from the sheep you'll find on the hills in Ireland or Scotland or England. It's a different breed of sheep. It's a different family of. They look different. There's slightly different requirements for them. So just be aware that not all fluffy sheep on the hills are exactly the same thing. But David, no, he was tending his family's flocks. And since we don't know how, so before Solomon's temple, how did the sacrifice system operate? This would be a very good pop quiz question for any of you who think that you would like to attend higher levels of learning. So what was the system before the first temple? That would be the tabernacle system, correct? But it's a much more informal system. And remember also that a big scene in David's life, one of his high points of his life, the description of it takes a lot of verses, is he did not want the tabernacle to be stuck on someone's ranch in the hills, in the Judean hills. He said, God, I want to build you a house. And the house means we're going to bring your seat, which is still the tabernacle, which is now at a ranch, somebody's ranch in the hills of Judea. We're going to bring that up to Jerusalem and build it an actual house and not have a tent of some kind, which is what they had. And that was one of David's missions that he felt was important to him. So how was the tabernacle working while it was at the ranch in the Judean hills? We don't know. Because if you remember, I'm going to take you a step back even more. Why was the tabernacle the most holy seat of God in a ranch in the Judean hills? Why is it there? Because in your story, the story is the tabernacle, when they came into the land, where did they put the tabernacle? They brought the tabernacle across the Jordan and they fought the battle. And where did they situate the tabernacle? Sort of in the center of the country, or in a central place, which is? Any ideas? They don't know? Then you need to take my class where we learn these things.
Yes, former prophets,
They
Tuesday
felt
nights at 7 o'clock.
fell for that. At Bethel. Bethel. And there's a famous story about the tabernacle. Is it? No, Shiloh. Slicha. Oh, my most grievous fault. No, it's Shiloh. Shiloh. Right? Why didn't you correct me?
Because Bethel sounded so good. It's house of God.
And I depend on you for these things. Want tea now? Sorry, Shiloh. And the famous story why you would connect Shiloh with the tabernacle is because of Eli. Eli and those boys of his, which is a very shameful part of.
And where can they learn about Eli and his sons?
Yeah, where can you learn about Eli and his sons? I don't know, something about the former prophets.
That must be true.
Must be true. No, those stories are going to be after Judges. After Judges, so 1 Samuel.
There's another Shiloh connection.
There's another Shiloh connections for what?
For its importance.
For its importance, yes. Go ahead. Yes, I know what you're going to say, but go ahead.
Back when Jacob was blessing his sons prior to his own death, the blessing related to Judah had to do with the ruling. How should we put it? The image is scepter, but whatever is a symbol of ruling would not depart from Judah until Shiloh comes. And that becomes an image, that becomes a messianic image already that far back. So you can see sort of a messianic carryover right into where the ark was then housed. And maybe it was housed there not only because of geographical concerns, but also perhaps because of the resonating connection it would have had to that expectation that was part of the blessing of Judah.
Okay. Yes. Anyway, prior to the tabernacle being in the ranch in the hills, and by the way, you drive if you come to Israel, and you get off the airplane at Lod Airport, which is near Tel Aviv, and you get in a bus and you start going up because you're going to drive to Jerusalem. You drive right by that ranch. There's a sign that the bus can get off there. And nowadays, there's a lovely restaurant there, a lovely outdoor and indoor restaurant there that we've eaten at a couple times.
Shiloh Shack?
Not the Shiloh Shack. No, it's not anywhere near Shiloh. Don't go to Shiloh without an Arab guide because it's in the West Bank. Thanks for helping.
Good name for a restaurant.
Shiloh Shack.
Yeah.
It sounds ever so delicious. Anyway, back to, so we don't know. The short answer is we don't know how the tabernacle operated. We don't know if it was a big enough operation. I mean, as far as you needed a system to be set up for sacrifice animals to be sacrificed at the tabernacle. We don't know how many thousands or hundreds of people used it on a day-to-day basis. But by the time you get to the Second Temple Judaism, it is such a huge operation day to day. Remember, it's working 24/7. It's working, the temple is working and presumably open 24/7 because it's not just a place. It's like the world of Disney. So it would have to be organized. The organization needs for an ongoing sacrifice system where the public is allowed to come and interact with a priest at the temple and bring a sacrifice. And remember, there's literally dozens of permutations of things that need to be sacrificed and reasons for people to come to the temple to do a sacrifice. So there'd have to be a lot of spreadsheets on their computers to make everything organized, and you would need to have leadership there that was used to dealing with public contact and processing those people, getting what they needed done, and then moving on to the next family that came, et cetera, et cetera. Just so if you could picture it more as a giant Disney system. I mean, you could think of Disney as Mickey Mouse and rides, but if you think of Disney as a system, and you have people coming to you that want to do things and need to be served, and then the people leave, and then the next family comes on a giant scale. That's the way the second temple system would have been. And so it would be normal to bring a whole group of sheep from different parts of the country for major sacrifice times. And you should think now of Pesach. Because what's the commandment? When families are supposed to go to Jerusalem, when they get to Jerusalem, they need to have their meal, their Passover meal. The Passover meal is lamb. There's no beef Passover meal at that time. The Passover meal was lamb. The lambs, you're very conscious of waste. They did not waste food. They were visitors, so they couldn't put it in their handy hotel refrigerator. They would have to eat. You couldn't have leftovers in a hot culture, in a society that did not use coolers of any kind. Especially if you're a visitor. And if you're a visitor to Jerusalem, you have a relative or you are doing an Airbnb. They have people rent out their rooms to you because Passover is one of the 3 pilgrim holidays. And so Jerusalem is going to be mobbed. And that's the normal state of affairs. And so you didn't, unless you brought your lamb with you for you to eat, which you could have done, but it would have to be inspected before you did that. You would go to, they had pens, they had sheep pens, giant places where you could go pick out a sheep. And yes, it is somewhat like a used car where you come up and say, I need a sheep for this many people in my family. And then you negotiate with a guy who's there. He's from a priestly family. And they would sell you the right size. And so that goes into Passover imagery because what that salesman, I hate to call him salesman, what that priest says to you, okay, how many people in your family? I'm looking over the group of sheep we have here. And this is a very good group because they were, he's going to, so this group of sheep was taken care of. They're from Bethlehem. And ooh, Bethlehem. Yeah, that's good. I'd like a Bethlehem sheep. But presumably you would have sheep from all around the city of Jerusalem. And could you drive, if you had a flock, could you drive them or cattle prod them to Jerusalem so they could be sold? Yeah, that's not, because remember, they're not supposed to be damaged in any way. They cannot have a permanent damage. They can't have scars. They can't have a broken leg. They can't have a spider bite, kind of thing. And so just think about the enormousness of the system that was going on there at Passover time every year. But Bethlehem, as I said last week, and I keep reiterating, nowadays, if you got in your car and you were downtown Jerusalem and you wanted to go to Bethlehem, first of all, you go due south on the Hebron Road, going south in your car, going an average of 40 miles an hour, you'll get to Bethlehem in about 12 and a half minutes. It's just not that far. It's not even as far from our house to the synagogue. Our house to the synagogue would be 3 times that far. Correct? You'll think about that.
Twice
that far.
Yeah,
but just in general,
yeah.
You're not talking about 6 days walk from Jerusalem. It's a half a day on a donkey. So you're thinking about that, right? So it's close. It's very close. As a matter of fact, we know that the temple used to get a lot of its water, and I won't go into. people know, especially vegetarians, if you talk to a vegetarian or if you yourself are a vegetarian, one of the arguments that is trying to show us that vegetarianism would be a good life is because it doesn't killing animals in order to eat them requires gallons, millions of gallons of water every year. So the sacrifice system required literally tons of water. And as we all know, in Jerusalem, they only get about 21 inches of rain a year, and it does not come in all times of the year. It only comes in the winter. They need a lot more water than that in order to operate the giant system that is the temple sacrifice system. And so they literally brought water from Bethlehem via aqueducts. When the Romans came, they brought technology with them. And so they brought this idea of aqueducts, which would carry water from places that technically were below the level of Jerusalem. Jerusalem is more on a mountain. And other places in Israel, they have a lot of water. It's not on a mountain. So how do you get the water up the mountain to Jerusalem? And that another story would be inserted here. But anyway, they made arrangements for water to be brought both from Galilee and from the south, which included Bethlehem. And if you go to specific places around Bethlehem, you can still see there on the ground, sometimes built into another structure, the aqueduct stones. And it's a square stone, and it has a circular hole, just like you would expect to see in a pipeline. The pipe would go through, but these blocks of limestone mainly are used as part of the aqueduct. You can still see those from the Roman temple period. Yeah. How did I get onto that? I'm sure you're all fascinated. Anyway, so the short answer. So when David was watching his sheep in the field, he was a shepherd. He was tending his family's field. It required strength and skill to be a good shepherd. Good shepherd, get it? I use that term on purpose. The good shepherd. Think literally about a shepherd that does a good job. Remember, the sheep are valuable. This is not a throwaway job. If you allow Wile E. Coyote to come and take one of your sheep, or take a sheep every night, if you allow any predator to come and take your sheep, your family's going to be, they'll take you off that duty. This is not something to put kids on. This is something that's a serious job. Now think how important it is if you're given the job, and it would be a job. It would not be get the youngest kid who's 8 years old and is playing with a stick to come and watch over the lambs that are being prepared for Passover. We have to fatten them up every year, so we put them in the fields that have been cut down. The fields have been harvested. We're going to put those special sheep in that field. That's the group of shepherds. In other words, you could argue the most valuable crop of sheep. Remember, if you're a greedy person and you're looking at each one of those little fluffy little, I don't know what you call them, fluffy little guys. Each fluffy little guy is worth a lot of money. It's valuable. And you're going to make them even more valuable by giving them the really good stubble that's there that they love. Yum, yum, yum.
Good food.
Good food for sheep. Not so good for people. Much better than what they normally would get. And so that group, and then that group of specially trained shepherds, and I'm sure highly paid shepherds, would also include the sons and the apprentices in the priestly families that were being prepared. The family were experts at sheep and understanding what would disqualify a sheep from being sacrificed to the temple, et cetera, et cetera. So now I'm going on and just repeating myself about that. So the answer is yes and no. Did David do that kind of shepherding? Yeah, I'm sure David was very good because it's pointed out in the story that he was strong and he could kill a bear and he could kill a lion.
Right.
And now all of you are going, where on earth are bears and lions going to come from in Israel? And now I'm going to attempt to answer this in a very short while.
Good luck.
Good. There were bears and there were lions. Now, they're not talking about Aslan the lion. They're not talking about African lions. They're talking about what you and I would think of as like a puma or a mountain lion. In other words, not Aslan. They're thinking about lions like we have here in North America, the ones that don't have the beautiful mane, but really like sheep is a very yummy lunch. Where did the bears and the lions live? Lions and tigers and bears. Oh my. No tigers. Predators like that, meat-eating predators would live along the
Mountains, like here. Mountains. We got them here.
We got what? I'm sorry, I missed it. We have what here?
Mountains. Up in the foothills, the mountains.
Yeah, the
Come
mountains.
down from the mountains, like here.
Yes, they do.
We've
Thank
got lions up here, but they're not the main African
No, no.
lions. We've got the coyote,
the mountain lions.
and
Yeah,
they love our sheep. We got lots of sheep here, but they're different sizes.
yeah. Yes, they are. Yeah. See, we have them here in North America. We're so not original. However, where would these be? Because if you're looking out on sandy dunes, you're not seeing lions and tigers. They would be over by the Jordan. So the Jordan at this time in history, so David's time especially, if not David's time, then into Second Temple period, there were jungles down by the Jordan. If you go down to the Jordan nowadays and you actually go along it, especially as you are in the center of Israel, I mean, you can have it down also into the Dead Sea area. You would have more trees of a specific kind. It won't be a rainforest jungle. That's not the kind of jungle you could think of, but they would have a lot of bushes and shrubs and trees, and that's where they used to live. What happened to the bushes and the shrubs and the trees? Short answer is, first of all, the Romans cut them down. So after a few hundred years, those jungles, those forests were depleted. But then back under the Turkish Empire, the Ottoman Empire, they also cut down the forests in the trees in Israel. Rome used them for not buildings really as much as for war machinery, catapults and other kinds. I am not an expert in warfare in Roman times. And then the Turks used them for steam engines. How did I get onto this? Oh, we're answering the shepherd question.
Mhm.
Why are you giving me the disapproving eyebrows?
No.
Okay. Anyway, so that is a very long answer to a very short question. But does that help you get the feel for it? So David was a shepherd, yes, but a shepherd
And it's
until
possible they did do Passover, but it would be more on a family level than the
Right.
Levites raising the sheep and they having to go see a Levite shepherd to get their sheep. It would be my own. And that's why his brothers chastised him for leaving the sheep.
No, the brothers chastised him for leaving sheep because that was his job. And the ones that David took care of, they could be used for anything. They could be used for wool. They could be used for food for the family. And there were probably herds of them rather than special pampered elite yearlings that would be used to eat. Because you can eat a big old sheep. And we knew a family that raised a couple sheep and then they would eat them. They would name them, these giant sheep that they raised, and then they would eat them. And I always thought that was bizarre in the worst way. That they would have a personal relationship and then eat that. I don't think I'm not thrilled with it. They had a butcher come and they put the pieces of meat in the freezer and they used to talk about eating that sheep. This is me. I've had a relationship with something I don't want to eat it really. I don't know. I'm just a wimp. What can I say? I act, strong, but really I'm just a woman. So I hope that answered your question. Yeah, how David is related to the sheep that were on the fields in Bethlehem, but same fields, maybe, yeah, same fields.
Same fields, and undoubtedly, as Patrice mentioned, some of them during the cycle of being raised would be used for Passover, because even though it wasn't a temple system, as she said, there was a tabernacle system which was operational. So there'd be something going on, building on what we learned from the Torah as to how the tabernacle was supposed to function. And as part of that, Passover would have been an important observance. But as you suggested, it was a family observance, much more family oriented, in the home than connected with a specific city, in this case, Jerusalem or Shiloh, where the tabernacle itself was. So, yeah, David and the sheep. I might also mention that a lot of the major figures of the Older Testament who become, in one sense or other, pictures of the Messiah to come, as Patrice pointed out a few minutes ago, described himself as the Good Shepherd. A lot of these patterns were shepherds, right? Abraham, shepherd. Isaac, shepherd. Jacob, shepherd. Joseph, shepherd. Moses, shepherd, and so forth. So you get the stream of patterns that's there as well.
And then there's that whole imagery about that we, in other words, the people, are just like flocks of sheep, which is not a compliment at all, because sheep are dumb. And by dumb, I don't mean they don't talk. They're very noisy, but they are not intelligent beings, and they cannot get themselves out of situations that their own carelessness has put them in, and they're not helpful. They are not helpful. They cannot help each other when each other gets into trouble. They need the shepherd. If they get stuck, they can't get themselves out, and they'll just, I guess if they're really sick, they'll just die there. If the shepherd's not there to help them. Even if there's no predators. Predators would be the icing on the problem cake. Maybe. So a stuck sheep would be lunch for a mountain lion. Yeah, lunch. All right. Why don't you? We have another. What? I know that. I just look at my watch.
Mm-hmm.
Thank
So
you.
I don't know if we have time for another one.
Well, these are. What do you mean we don't have time for another question?
Okay, if you think we.
What are you going to be doing? I was just going to do the Lost Tribes of Israel. I think you can do that.
I think we.
We can do a short version. You don't want to?
I was thinking for a short version, probably we'll do that one. And then do Lost Tribes next time.
That requires about 3 minutes.
Okay,
tops.
whatever you think. Just two final connectors. And I lost one of them just as I was thinking that. On this whole sheep connection and the David connection. One of the more common references to David and to Bethlehem, remember, occurs in Chadodi, which we generally sing most every Friday night. Jesse's son, the Bethlehemite, comes bringing us redemption. So that becomes yet another image. Jesse's son, of course, was David. David was not only a Bethlehemite, he was a shepherd. So it becomes a perfect image and then picture for the one who's going to come, who is the ultimate son of David, also from Bethlehem, also a shepherd. And thereby also probably, by way of image, connecting back to the prophecy in Isaiah 53, all we like sheep, we've wandered astray. what God has placed on him, the good shepherd, the transgressions of all of us. So anyhow, just to further round out that picture and that connection, that I'm going to guess Luke helped to layer into his writing.
And it's ironic too that and we correctly think that, younger, if you just have your family sheep and you don't have the super special pampered sheep that they had in Bethlehem at that time of year, if you just have your family sheep, depending on how many there are, that you might hire people to care for the sheep, or you have your younger, they have to be of a certain age, either boys or girls, take care of the sheep or goats. Remember, we keep talking about sheep, but they also had herds of goats. It would require human tending, but it doesn't require, rocket surgery to take care of your average flock of sheep.
You want to explain your metaphor there?
Yeah, because you can either choose, it doesn't take a rocket science to do it, or it doesn't take a brain surgeon to do it. So on TV during the week, somebody knowingly made the joke, it doesn't take a rocket surgeon to do it. So we've been laughing about that all week because, it's COVID and you're trying to entertain yourselves. You can't always, chat with other people at all. So, yeah, rocket surgery. It doesn't, you don't need to have that to take care of your normal flock of sheep, depending on how many there are. And where was I going with before you interrupted me with rocket surgery?
With what you just finished saying, it doesn't take any special training.
It doesn't take any, well, no, but you have to hang out. So I would assume that some would take, so if you have a whole tribe of brothers and sisters plus hired people, so you might have 5-6 people watching a herd of sheep, depending on how big, and then you might bring the 4-year-olds, and you could watch a 4-year-old, and some of the 4-year-olds would think the sheep were cool and want to pet them all, but you couldn't hurt anything. You were all together there, and there wasn't a lot of things you could get in danger from, other than the predators. But the predators are going to more come at night, so you wouldn't have the kids out with the shepherds. When it's like more of a village or an extended family, you create opportunities for small children to be taken care of, and still got to get work done. So once again, the closest thing we have to that nowadays is a big farm. That's the closest thing we have. A farm, and where the family would have a ton of kids. All right. So could you elaborate on the lost tribes of Israel? You said you had stuff in it. I will warn you in 5 minutes.
All right.
All right. So give us 10.
First of all, the background to why there is this thought about the 10 lost tribes of Israel. And let me start by saying at the outset, they were not 12 tribes, they were 13, but that's a different story.
The numbering of the tribes is complicated. Yeah. It depends on what portion of the scripture you're in, and I think then we should pass along. So if you're sitting there trying to count the 12 tribes, yeah, it depends on where you are in scripture, and it depends on what you're counting as a tribe, and we'll get to the issues of that in a minute.
Anyhow, so what happened in the history of Israel, and as part of the history of Israel, after you had Saul as king, then David as king, and then his son Solomon as king, and when Solomon died, the situation deteriorated rapidly, and there was a split in the kingdom. For more on this, obviously, here comes the commercial again, you need to take the course of former prophets. All this is absolutely vital to understand. Jeroboam led a group of tribes in rebellion against the son of Solomon, Rehoboam, and as it turns out, some 10 tribes went his direction, and so there was a split in the kingdom. In the time of the split kingdom, the northern part, which is where Jeroboam set up shop because of the tribes that went with him, was known as Israel. The southern kingdom, those who were faithful to Rehoboam, were called Judah. So Israel and Judah. Well, about the year 705, maybe a year or two earlier, Assyria comes in and conquers the northern kingdom of Israel, carries it off into captivity into Assyria, leaves some people behind, carries a bunch off. Now, the southern kingdom was a little more than, I'll say 120 years later. Back up, Assyrian captivity, make that 720. So about 115 years later, in the early 600s, the southern kingdom rather was carried off into captivity by Babylon. We know that the people returned from that southern captivity. There is no expressed return from the northern captivity, and so the thought developed down through the ages that those tribes that went off into the Assyrian captivity never returned, and so those tribes were lost.
And they're gone.
And they're gone.
Except they're not.
And that's the 10 tribes. So there were 2 left, and those stayed as part of the surviving southern kingdom that returned from captivity in Babylon. And so we've been searching for the 10 lost tribes ever since. It somehow got scattered all around the world. We don't know who they are, and there are all kinds of stories as to.
Well, if you've ever heard of the idea that some of the lost tribes settled in the British Isles, there's a whole bunch of religions that believe that, sometimes called, so that the residents of the UK or the British Isles are actually the Jews, the 10 lost tribes. If you've heard that, yeah, that's not right. But some people really believe that. There's a whole type of Christianity that's called British Israelism, and they believe that story, that the 10 lost tribes went there. So believe it or don't, I wouldn't believe it, but I acknowledge that some people do believe this, and that causes weirdness in their theology. But go ahead, dear.
Down through the ages, it hasn't just been UK. Some have suggested that eventually they found their way into Americas. Some have suggested they were in Europe. Some have suggested they were in Asia. I mean, just about anywhere you can think of.
When they got lost.
When they got lost.
Supposedly, they are lost.
And as the one song used to say, they never returned, no, they never returned, and their fate is still unknown. Well, that's the way the story goes as well. Now, here's the deal.
It's not true.
When the kingdoms divided, when the rebels left, and unlike in U.S. history, it was the South that tried to secede from the North. This was the opposite. The North tried to secede from the South. What do you think the people who were faithful to the line of Solomon did? And therefore of David? What do you think the people who were faithful to the temple, which was in the South, what do you think they did? Well, just what any faithful kind of person would do. They moved into the southern kingdom. So right from the outset, you had descendants of all 12 tribes resident in the southern kingdom. Now, in the books of Kings, and I think and Chronicles, or Chronicles and Kings, but I'm thinking it's both, you have mention of 2 other how should we put it, migration south from the north. I think one was in the time of Josiah, but there was, my recollection is there was not just 1, but 2. So more people from the north came down into the south. So the southern kingdom, while often thought of as just being a kingdom of 2.5 tribes, turned out to be a 12-tribe kingdom. When the return from exile took place under Cyrus, it was decreed by Cyrus the Great, who was at that time the Persian emperor, having taken over for Babylon. His empire covered the previous Assyrian empire. So when he said people could come back, then guess what? They would have come back at that time from all over, including Assyria. And how do we know? Ezra, and I think this is found recorded in the book of Nehemiah, may have been recorded in the book of Ezra. The situation is that, and I'm thinking more it's Nehemiah. There was a special covenant ceremony, which is mentioned in Nehemiah, and I think this is where it takes place. The people were told to bring animals, and if I remember right, it was a bull for every tribe that was present there. Well, how many bulls do you think were offered? The text tells
2.5.
2.5, yes. I'd hate to have been the half one. The text is very clear. There were 12. So when the people returned from captivity, it's clear that there were representatives of all 12 tribes. When both Peter and James were writing their letters, they addressed them to the 12 tribes scattered throughout the empire. So they knew of all 12. So, and then one other, and this isn't the whole story, one other piece of further information, since we were talking about the Luke nativity story in Luke chapter 2. The parents bring Yeshua into the temple to bring the appropriate sacrifice for his Brit Milah, circumcision, and he was there seen by a man whose name is Shimon, but also a woman whose name was Anna or Hannah. We don't know what Shimon's tribe was, but we are told Hannah's tribe. Would you like to guess what tribe she was from? Benjamin? Judah? Levi? And now suddenly I'm drawing a blank. It was
Asher.
I was going to say either Asher or Gad.
No, it's Asher.
Asher. Asher was theoretically one of the lost tribes.
But they weren't lost
But obviously they weren't.
because there were some Asher people living in Jerusalem.
And in the temple. And she was called a prophet. So there. So that's in brief the story of the 10 lost tribes that were never really lost, but to some imaginations they were. And I use the term imagination because then that becomes the imaginative foundation for some of those.
The British Israelism.
British Israelism and the other forms of Israelism that now claim that they are the inheritors, the descendants of the 10 lost tribes. There's even a group somewhat tangentially related to the Messianic movement who considers themselves the House of Ephraim, one of the so-called lost tribes.
Yeah.
Now, I like that story, that part of the story, a whole lot because when I get to encounter people like that, I say, how interesting. Well, I'm a Jew, born a Jew all the way back through all of our genealogical records so we can connect. And when I went to Jerusalem, actually it was
Tel Aviv.
Tel Aviv, that's what I was going to say. Tel Aviv, in the Diaspora Museum, there you can look up your family background and they will also give you a tribal connection if they can make one. Guess what? I am of the house of Ephraim. I'm also of the house of Levi, because that's part of the one side, but on the other side, I'm in the house of Ephraim. So if you're looking for someone from the house of Ephraim, hi.
Also, I do want to tell you, and it's somewhat related to British Israelism. So in the United States, we have our own special form of strange ideas about Israel, the Mormons.
I was going to say
If
that,
you
yes.
convert to Mormonism, they will assign you a tribe. They only assign 2 tribes. You're either from Ephraim or from Manasseh. And they whisper it in your ear. It's not a formal announcement. It's just, yeah. And where did they get that from? Oh, I don't know. I have no idea. I don't believe Joseph Smith ever said that now you're going to all have tribes or something. But you see how it really is. It's not something, we should rise up in arms and, start preaching things. It's just yucky. It's just yucky. And British Israelism, remember at the bottom of that is those brown people, the Middle East, oh, they're not Jews. British people are Jews. White people are it's a very strange
And
kind of,
potentially sinister.
well, anytime you build what you're teaching on things that are not truthful, that's going to be a problem. It's going to, that platform is going to collapse at some point, and it usually causes destruction, kind of thing. Yeah.
Can I ask a quick question?
Okay.
The Ethiopian Jews, are they
Yes.
possibly a remnant of a lost tribe?
Well, obviously, and Ethiopian Jews that scattered to Africa. Remember that Jews, when the Romans took over in the year 70 and also in the year 135, each time they forced the Jews out of Jerusalem first and then the whole of Israel. They started scattering. Now, they didn't just scatter north and west and up to Germany, although they did that. They also scattered to the south west, which would be northern Africa. They also scattered to the east. So there's Jewish communities in China and there's Jewish communities in India. So they scattered to all the points on the compass. And it's important to remember that too. There was a group from the scattering that came down to Kush. So it would have been in times where they came to Kush. Remember, they also scattered, and this is in 135, into Egypt. And if you go south in Egypt, you're going to hit Kush or Ethiopia. So we don't know where the heart of that came from. We don't know when that came. Some people say that there was that person called the Queen of Sheba, and that she came to visit Solomon, and that they had a relationship, and then she came back, so it goes, to her place, which we would identify as Ethiopia, and she spread Judaism there. So that's another way that Jews would have arrived there, or would have, built up a Jewish community there. So we don't know the origins of that. I don't know the origins of that community. If it's of interest to you, the Ethiopian Jews are the ones that had a literally miraculous lifting out of Ethiopia about 25 years ago, where literally overnight, many Ethiopian Jews got in an airplane, and when they got off the airplane, they were in Israel. They left Ethiopia because of persecution, and the Israeli government took them in and literally sent planes to pick them up and bring them to Israel. So they left just above a Stone Age culture. And when they got off the plane, they were in modern culture. So it's a very, very fascinating story. It's not always a happy story, but it is a very heartwarming story about the Ethiopian Jewish community and how are they saved. There are people in Ethiopia that still claim to be Jews, but they have trouble proving it. So it's not that there is no Jewish presence anymore in Ethiopia, but they have difficulty proving it.
I think the bottom line is the Ethiopian Jews should no more be classified as one of the lost tribes than should the Jews from India or from China. Because as Patrice mentioned, when we got scattered, we talked about the Assyrian captivity, the Babylonian captivity. There was a scattering after the destruction of the temple in the year 70. There was a further scattering, once again, that Patrice referenced after the Bar Kokhba revolt in the year 135. So there were numerous scatterings where those who were living in Israel, remember all 12 tribes, were scattered yet again. So were these tribes lost? No, they weren't lost. They were just scattered. So again, to get back to the main point here, although some people have thought that the Ethiopian Jews are some of the 10 lost tribes, no, they're some of the 12 lost tribes, or more precisely, the 12 scattered tribes.
Yeah, the 12 scattered tribes. And even the idea of the 12 scattered tribes, well, it's like 13 scattered tribes. We're not gonna get to the one on Manasseh, although I am reading on Manasseh. I probably will talk about this in class on Tuesday night, but we can do it next time.
Yeah.
About, because that's a whole side
So-
portion to the story about Manasseh and why they're called a half a tribe.
Mhm.
Yeah, but it's not that mysterious and it's pretty easily explainable.
Thank you.
One further thought. During the time of the Newer Testament, historians of that period tell us that only about 1/3, if I remember right, of the Jewish people in the Roman Empire were in Israel. The rest were throughout the other parts of the empire. And I think the empire had at that time, they estimate between 6 or 7 million to 8 million Jews in the empire. So, hence the letters from Peter and James to those who are scattered throughout the empire. And he describes them again as the 12 tribes.
Even though there were like 13 and a half tribes. But that's okay. It's okay. Why don't you get the Havdalah thing going?
And we do also have to offer an apology. One of you sent in a question for the last session, which we postponed to this session, but unfortunately, because of getting sidetracked in the sheep fields of Bethlehem
Again.
and joining the 12 tribes who were scattered
We're
everywhere.
wandering. We're still wandering, John and I.
We did not get to that question. We will get to that question, and for that we apologize that we postponed it yet another time. All right. Yes, you were going to say something while I'm gathering stuff.
Well, not that I can remember now.
Oh, okay. But you said
But
something.
get your Havdalah stuff ready. So, we're here. So Virginia might not know this. It's warm here in Florida today. We had our house open all night. So that's something we can't say normally in January. Because I love winter in Florida. I like it to be cool for a few months. But last night, when you have an open door and only using one blanket, that ain't so cold. So.
And have a fan on.
And have our fan. What can we do? Weather is crazy.
All right. Now, we've certainly passed that time when there were a couple stars in the sky.
Stars.
So, if you would be kind
Enough
enough
to light it.
light it.
He's allowing me to light it because he likes to laugh because I can't light the candle.
If I may share, I sent an invitation to everybody on my text messaging to come, and Jenny and Jessica are the only ones to come. Jessica, is Mom here with us tonight? I don't know. Anyway, so I sent out a bunch of invitations.
Thank you. Keep doing that, by the way. Don't
That's
stop.
great.
She was, but she went to bed maybe about like 15 minutes ago or so.
Okay.
Because it's dark. Right, let me move this a little closer so they can see. There we are.
Okay, cool. All right. Behold, God is my salvation. I will trust and will not be afraid. For the Lord my God is my strength and my song. He also has become my salvation. For the Lord my God is my strength and my song. He also has become my salvation. Lie, 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 lie. Lie, 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 lie. Behold, God is my salvation. I will trust and will not be afraid. For God, the Lord, is my strength and song, and he has become my salvation. Therefore, with joy will I draw water out of the wells of salvation. Salvation belongs to the Lord. Your blessing be upon your people. The Lord of hosts is with us. The God of Jacob is our refuge. In the past, the Jews had light and joy. They had gladness and honor. So be it with us. I will lift up the cup of salvation. and call upon the name of the Lord. Now, while we say the blessing, we don't drink the wine yet. So,
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, borei peri hagafen.
Amen. Deserving of praise are you, Lord our God. You are the ruler of the universe, who creates the fruit of the vine, which we will enjoy as a cup of salvation momentarily. Now, as we move through the rest, we will move through this without interruption. First, a blessing for the spice, the sweet spices, to remember the sweetness of Shabbat and how we anticipate the sweetness of Shabbat to come. Then we'll have the blessing over the light itself, which helps us remember that there's a distinction between light and darkness, so between this day and the other days. And then we'll have the concluding benediction, which reinforces the distinction between this day and the other days. By the way, remember too that the light is emblematic of the light of the eternal Shabbat, the Shabbat to come, which will be reinforced when we sing Eliyahu Hanavi. Having introduced all that, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, borei minei besamim, borei minei besamim. Amen. Lai lai la 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 lai 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 la 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 lai. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, borei me'orei ha'esh, borei me'orei ha'esh. Amen. Lai lai la 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 lai 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 la 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 lai 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 lai. Deserving of praise are you, O Lord our God. You're the ruler of the universe who creates various kinds of spices. Deserving of praise are you, O Lord our God. You are the ruler of the universe who creates the light of the fire. And deserving of praise are you, O Lord our God. You're the ruler of the universe who has made a distinction between holy and common, between light and darkness, between Israel and the nations, between the seventh day and the 6 days of the working week. Baruch atah Adonai hamavdil ben kodesh lechol. Deserving of praise are you, O Lord. You distinguish between holy and common. And now we get to drink. And what's left over of the wine will be used to help extinguish the light of the fire, because it's a reminder that as this Shabbat leaves us, we anticipate the Shabbat to come. And I'm watching that candle go drip, 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 and I'm going to try not to burn myself while I do this. And we say, bye-bye Shabbat.
Bye-bye, Shabbat. Oop, we have a little monument to the wax here. Oop.
Okay, and as we anticipate the Shabbat to come next week, but the Shabbat to come in the Messianic age, we anticipate the coming of Elijah, the prophet. Now, before we sing, a quick thought just popped into my mind. We also think in terms of Elijah, the prophet, and anticipate him coming during the time of Passover. And we spent a lot of time talking about Passover stuff today. But guess what? Remember last night? What was our reading about? The Torah passage that Parsha for this week is about Passover. So the discussion this evening was most appropriate, and so is the song for Elijah appropriate on a couple of fronts.
Okay, we spoke better than we knew.
There we go.
Okay. Okay. Oh, Eliyahu?
Yes.
Okay. Eliyahu Hanavi, Eliyahu Hatishbi, Eliyahu Hanavi, Eliyahu Hagiladi, Eliyahu Hanavi, Eliyahu Hatishbi,
Eliyahu Hanavi, Eliyahu Hagiladi, Bimheira Yavo Aleinu, Bimheira Yavo Aleinu, Imashiach ben David, Imashiach ben David. Lie, 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 lie. Lie, 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 lie. Lie, 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 lie. And with apologies to your ears and to Elijah, we say Shavua Tov.
Shavua Tov, everybody.
Have a good week, a week of blessing and happiness and joy, as much as possible.
Shavua
Keep
Tov.
warm.